Hello my friends, ATACMS here. In this video I'm going to go through some news from the Ukraine war that has happened the past day or two. And I'm not going to report the news uncritically or without any comments. I'm going to report the news and then have a little comment about how this news is important or how it's relevant. So if you think this sounds interesting, then keep watching. Now the first news I want to talk about is this statement that US officials apparently say that they are not banning Ukraine from using ATACMS in Kursk because of their de-escalation policy, because they have talked about de-escalation as an argument for not allowing Ukraine to do this and that. But now they have changed their argument to say, well, they think that these weapons are better used in Crimea to attack Crimea rather than in Kursk. And I can tell you why that's baloney. BS. Attacking Crimea is of course nice. We can get some anti-aircraft systems done and sometimes a military ship will be destroyed. That's fine. But it doesn't help Ukrainians who are fighting at the front lines from dying. Not at all. In order to help minimize the Ukrainian casualties, you need to destroy the airplanes that are dropping glider bombs on the Ukrainian front lines. Glider bombs are very large bombs, ton heavy, packed with explosives that make an enormous crater, that are precision guided weapons because you put some wings on them and then you drop them at high speed from a high altitude using an aircraft so they can glide without any propulsion towards their target, and they can glide like 60 kilometers. So the airplanes that Russia has can drop them out of range of Ukrainian anti-aircraft systems. They don't risk getting shot down, and they are killing a lot of Ukrainians at the front line. And in order to stop that killing, and it absolutely has to be stopped in order to win the war for Ukraine, they need to use these ATACMS that are the only effective weapons to stop these glider bombs. Not by targeting the planes, because they can't shoot down the airplanes, but they can target the airplanes when they are on the ground in Russian air bases inside of Russia, around Kursk and also in Rostov behind Donbass, where they're also flying out from Russian bases and plummeting Ukrainian front lines in the Donbass region. That will help Ukraine a lot. Using the ATACMS in Crimea, it's nice, yes, but it doesn't change the war, doesn't help Ukrainians from getting killed at the front line. And that's why I think that news is important, and why, again, the US strategists are completely out of touch with what reality is in this war. The other time they were out of touch in reality was when they recommended Ukraine to attack last summer into heavily fortified Russian defense lines without having been given an air force that could match the Russian air force, and without having any long-range anti-aircraft systems that could keep away the Russian aircraft. So what happened was, of course, very predictable if you had any understanding of how war functions. When the Ukrainians attack, they go out of their, you could say, shelter, and then they get vulnerable because they have to do that in order to attack into the Russian defense lines. And then they get bombarded with these Russian airplanes that they can't do anything about. And they get smashed. That's what happened last summer. It was US strategists that said they should do that. Bad idea, bad strategy, and now they're proposing this, also bad strategy. So that was one of the news, but let's keep on. The next news I thought would be interesting to mention is that Ukraine apparently has hit a large Russian military convoy of vehicles and killed a lot of vehicles and also people near Korenevo in this Kursk region that they are having this incursion into Russia. Let me show you where that is on a map and why that's kind of important. Here we have Ukraine. And up here is where all the action is. It is this city here. Let's zoom out. So here we have Ukraine, here we have Russia, and what is happening right here is that there is this city here. It's a mid-sized city and Ukraine is trying to take it. It will be important. You can see there are a lot of roads that are going into this and also a railroad. And it will be a strategically important city for Ukraine to take this city. But of course there are Russians inside this city and they can hide between buildings and so forth. So it's not an easy thing to just go into a city and take it. So what Ukraine is trying to do is, you can see they have two attack vectors. Instead of going right into it, they're going to try to surround it and then make the Russians who are inside this city surrender. that has worked very well for Ukraine during this offensive, simply surround the cities and have the Russians surrender afterwards. Now, I just said that it was a bad strategy to just attack Russians when you don't have an air force and you don't have sufficient anti-aircraft systems. That still apply, that Ukraine doesn't have a good air force and not sufficient anti-aircraft systems. That's still true. So what's different here? Well, Ukraine are attacking a city that doesn't have minefields around them and that doesn't have prepared trench systems around them. So these two things are working for them in this Kursk incursion that didn't work for them when they were trying to attack in Donbass. And the other third thing that's working for Ukraine here is that they are fighting mostly against conscripts that have been called in from the civilian life and to get some military training like for 6 or 9 or 12 months, and then they are back into the civilian life. And these soldiers are not very motivated. They have to go into the army because the law says that they have to go when they're called to do military service. I've been a conscript myself in the Danish army, so I know how it functions. They're not professional soldiers. They've only been in the army for a short while, and of course they're not as good as the contract soldiers that are professionals and that are in the Russian army for years and that do military stuff for a living. So they're not as good, and they're also more, you could say, easier to convince to give up, lay down their weapons and surrender than these contractors that are more diehard soldiers that would never surrender. Yeah. So I thought this news was important because it shows a little bit about how the battle is going around this city here. And apparently a large Russian convoy of military vehicles has been hit by HIMARS successfully. There are no pictures of it currently, but if I find some pictures and video about it, I'll of course put it on my Twitter feed. By the way, all the news I'm going to tell you here, they are all from my Twitter feed, but here in this video I can just put a little more context and commentary on why I'm tweeting these news and why I think it's interesting. So that's why you should watch my videos as well. But otherwise, go to my Twitter channel, there's a link below this video, and subscribe to my Twitter channel, and you'll get more up-to-date news about what I think is important in this Ukraine war and also other things that I find interesting. Okay, but I think that's enough for that story. Let's move on. Now, the other news I want to show you in this video is this, that there's a power outage in Vladivostok, that is a very large city in Russia, and they just don't have power. And let me show you where that city is. Here we have Europe, and then we go Russia here, and all the way here. And here we have Vladivostok. Huge city, let's zoom out. And it's without power, all of it. We have Japan. Japan is right there, so it's on the other end of Russia, you could say. So why is this important? It's important because it's happening not just in Vladivostok, but also in other large cities in Russia, that the power simply go out for hours or even for days. And why is that happening? It's actually not Ukraine's fault. It's because they don't maintain their stuff. They are in desperate lack of labor, and they are paying the weapons industry much higher wages, so everybody are going to work in the Russian weapons industry, and then people who work to maintain the grid, they're just not people there who can maintain it. So Russia is starting to rot up from within, just like the old Soviet Union were, because they were spending all the money on military stuff, and then the rest of the economy went down and was rotting up. And the same is now happening because Putin has decided to do this war and spend all the money on military stuff while the rest of Russia is going to rot up. It's not this news that's important, but it's the phenomenon that Russia is rotting from within and basically breaking down. There are some other news that I thought was important that is in the same kind of thing. This is a video with an accident of a train that has been derailed in Russia. There's another accident also with a train that has been derailed, and here there's some arson on a train that has been burned, and that's all happened in one day in Russia. It happens every single day. Why is it happening? The whole railroad system in Russia is actually breaking down and is not functioning as it should. And why is that all happening? Again, it's because the highest paid work is in the defense industry, so people are moving over there and they have a lack of people for the railways. But there's another factor also here with railroads, and that is that Ukraine Secret Service is having bounties for any Russian who wants to sabotage whatever in Russia. It could be a factory fire, or it could be this derailment of the railroad system. Now, Russia is also doing the same in Ukraine. They're also having bounties for Ukrainians who wants to betray their country and sabotage some Ukrainian infrastructure. But it appears that Ukraine by far is winning this war. A lot more sabotage, a lot more fires and trains that are derailed is happening every day in Russia than is happening in Ukraine. Most of what is being destroyed in Ukraine is being destroyed by Russian military sending in drones and missiles destroying stuff in Ukraine, whereas a lot of stuff is being destroyed in Russia is simply sabotaged by Russians who get bounties from the Ukrainian Secret Service. And I thought that was an interesting thing that you should know about. But I have one more story before I'll finish the video. So the other important news that I want to report in this video is this, that Politico newspaper reported that Biden is open to sending long-range cruise missiles to Ukraine. And in particular, they are talking about the JASSM cruise missiles that the United States have. That's very, very important. And it's also a cruise missile that is launched from an F-16. That's what we are seeing here, an F-16 fighter. And it's dropping one of these JASSM missiles. Now let me bring in my little geek Excel spreadsheet where I keep all the weapons that I bump into and that I want to know about. Here I have a collection of important long-range missiles. And here we have this missile that we are talking about that can be launched from F-16, and really any NATO airplane can launch it. It comes in two versions. The JASSM's standard version that has a range of 370 kilometers, and then it also comes in a JASSM's extended range that has a range of almost 1,000 kilometers. The important thing is it's a stealth cruise missile. That means it is radar invisible, the missile. That's very important. That means it's super hard to shoot down. It's also a cruise missile. A cruise missile means it can go low, like 20 meters above ground, and stay there. That also means it goes under the radar. And even Russian radar airplanes that are flying high and that has a radar that can look down cannot see it either, because it's a stealth cruise missile. So they won't see it coming, it'll just come. And the other thing that's important is that it has a big warhead, 450 kilo. That's powerful enough to take down the Kursk bridge. And it's also big enough to have a lot of cluster munition that can be used on Russian airfields to destroy Russian aircraft that are bombing Ukrainian front lines with glider bombs. But perhaps even more important is how many of these systems that the US have built. They're building them currently, and they've built them for many years. They have, of the standard version, they have 7,500 of them. And for the long-range version, they have 3,500 of them. That's an enormous amount of cruise missiles. For comparison, the Storm Shadow that we have all been hearing about in the news, only 700 to 1,000 has been built of those. And they are split evenly between UK and France. We know France, they're only giving a few of their missiles away to Ukraine. They may get 100 all in all. And the UK will probably give them nearly all they have, like 400. But that means Ukraine will not have a lot of these Storm Shadow missiles, and certainly not enough to make a big change in the war. So that's why it's so important that we open up for another kind of missile that can do the same job and that is far more plentiful. So that's a super important news, and I hope that it will be allowed. Again, if they're only allowed to use them in Crimea, it's not going to help Ukraine that much. It will help, but it'll be far better if they can target Russian airfields and end this threat of Ukrainian being bombarded with these glider bombs. But I think that's a lot of news, and there are many more news I could talk about, but we don't want to make a super long video. And I'll be back with more videos like this if you like it. So if you like this kind of commentary on my Twitter feeds, news that I pick out there, then subscribe to my channel. And also, if you disagree with me or you agree with me, please give me a like up or thumbs down and put some comments in my comment section. I'm really interested in hearing what people think, because, you know, this is important matters. But anyway, I wish you a great life in freedom and democracy. Goodbye.